Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and I'm working on our faction versus faction build guides. And one of the factions people have been asking me to upload a video for is the Blood Angels versus the Orks. This build has definitely changed with all the different updates that have been happening with the Orks lately, and I find that this works out pretty effectively against them with the new updates in the post-patch. So hopefully this will give you guys some ideas of force selections that you can use against the forces of the Orks to make it a more enjoyable experience. It typically is a pretty evenly based matchup. Both forces have really good units that can work out highly effective. I think the Blood Angels slightly have an advantage in their favor because pretty much every unit you have is going to be good against the Orks, and most of the units that the Orks are going to have are going to be good against you, but there's a few that are a big flop, so there's more chances of the Ork player to make some mistakes to allow you to take advantage of the situation with your increased mobility and locking them down into melee than they're going to have out shooting you, because post patches the Orks are really powerful at range, and they actually got a little bit nerfed at melee, which is kind of a bummer. So before I continue on, if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. And if you'd like some tips on faction army guides, let me know, and I will try to upload a faction versus faction army with my thoughts about why I build out armies like that and what units I would recommend versus whatever faction you guys are interested in. I think the most fair way of doing this is just comment below, and whatever faction versus faction has the highest interest will be the videos I'll do, instead of going through one faction all at once, because I think that's going to be unfair for people who have interest in factions that were later released, and some of those ones who need probably more help than doing everything with the Blood Angels, because Blood Angels are good at everything, and they're just a fun faction because they have tools for pretty much every situation. So saying that, playing as the Blood Angels versus the Orks, I find that something like this is a pretty effective build order. I like to have the 2 Sanguinary Priests because I can end up putting the Embrace of Blood on a unit that'll give them plus 40 momentum for 2 turns, and then I'd like to give Righteous Exhortation, which increases melee damage by 25%, and then I also have Healing, which I can do every turn as well. So I tend to do 2 just in case I overextend one, it gets killed, so I have 2 HQ units. A unit that's actually surprisingly good against the Ork forces is the Invictor Warsuit, and if you sit back and give this guy a little bit of a buff with a Tech Marine to increase his accuracy and damage, this guy can sit back, and with his autocannon he can effectively take out a Weird Boy, Pain Boy, other commander units, assuming that there's no big mechs around there to give the custom force field damage reductions. So you can easily snipe out commanders and generate a lot of momentum. If you were going to be fighting somebody that's doing a big knob build and you were somehow to know that, then doing the Heavy Flamer would be great for you. I typically think that if you're doing the Heavy Flamer build, though, it makes more sense to just use the Dreadnought, because you can do that same thing for a cheaper cost, because here it's 195 compared to 250. So it's really the autocannon that I'd be bringing this guy out for, so he can act as my long-range shooter against the Weird Boys, so I can take advantage of that situation while also having a free ranged attack and some rockets as well, or grenades I guess it would be in this situation, because the thing with the Orks is a lot of them don't have a lot of armor, so you can really, and they just act as bullet sponges because they have a lot of HP, so you can easily chop through all that with these Invictor Warsuits. The big thing is these guys are coded as vehicles, so you have to be very, very careful against Ludas with custom Blastas or whatever, BB Def Guns, that's what they're called, because they will do shit tons of damage against these guys. It can almost not one shot them unless they're really buffed up and you were nerfed, but they can really mess up your day So just be very, very cautious if you're seeing those, and if you do, you want to focus fire them, then work it on the flash kits, and then it should be pretty easy for you to mop them up from there on out, as long as there's not knobs with the power claws getting into melee, but you should be able to kite them since you have 5 movement with these guys. The Death Company tend to be a good option. The reason is the big thing, like I was alluding to earlier, is post-patch, the Orks have suffered a slight melee reduction in their effectiveness and a big buff in their range damage and their tier 1 ability, which gives them additional shots. So the big thing with these guys, you want to use as much jump infantry as you can to lock guys into melee to really affect them, and then also be able to assassinate any sort of HQ units that may be present. So using as many Assault Marines and Death Company are going to be big benefits for you here. So I think Death Company, just with their regular kits, are going to be perfectly fine. You're going to be killing models, you're going to be triggering Black Rage. Unfortunately, that means that is going to make it easier for these guys to get taken out, but for the most part, this should work out pretty effectively for you. Predators are always good. The Twin Assault Cannon allows you to do significant amounts of damage. The big thing is, again, this is coded as a vehicle, so beware beamy def guns, because they will absolutely decimate these guys at range. But if you can take them out, then these guys will have free reign to kill everything else. I typically bring Hellblasters, at least 2, with the Heavy Plasma Incinerator. Again, I want to be sniping out as many of the Ork HQ units as I can, so they're not buffing everything, and then I can take everybody else out. Likewise, a lot of Ork players, because the Def Dreads with their range damage got significant buffs, so a lot of people are bringing the Def Dreads out, so this Heavy Plasma Incinerator will definitely help you destroy those guys from range, because you don't want to necessarily engage them in melee, because they're going to blow up when they get killed, and you don't want to end up injuring all of your infantry here. So using these guys definitely will help you. The Landspeeder Tornado, I pretty much like these guys against pretty much every faction, because you get the increased armor, you get a heavy bolter, and then you can give them a heavy flamer. So if you can hide them in cover, pop around a corner, flame down some knobs, or flash kits, beamy def guns, pretty much all those things you should be able to just about kill, if not flat out kill, unless they're buffed up. That will definitely make them pay for themselves, and then you can use them to mop up weakened units with the heavy bolter. And then if you keep them at range, you can do hit and run tactics. So for all those reasons, I really like the Landspeeder Tornadoes. And then again, for the same reason with the Death Company, I like the Assault Squad. The big thing is you just got to be very, very careful with activating the assault tactics, because you'll end up suffering 75% increased range damage the following turn after you do this. So if you can guarantee a kill against an HQ unit, then it may make sense for you to pop it, but otherwise you'll want to be very, very cautious about that. The big thing is you just got to make sure you really respect and fear Burna Boys, because as long as they have all the models in the squad, they should be able to do a squad wipe out of these guys. So just be very, very cautious with that, and make sure that you focus those guys down as well, and then you just lock everybody into melee and you can mop them up with everybody else. So that tends to be very, very effective. In terms of units that I almost never bring when I'm fighting the Ork boys, is the Librarian Def Dread. For the same reason for other factions, you know, he tends to be pretty expensive. He doesn't have a lot of splash with his Force Haliber. Yes, he's got some good bonuses, but for the most part, these guys are going to get shot up before they can get into melee. And once they get into melee, they're not going to be killing things fast enough to generally make it worthwhile. So for that reason, I tend not to use these guys. The other guys I tend not to use are the Aggressors. Now, I kind of hate to say I personally never use them, but I have had opponents have really good success against me with Aggressors with the Flamestorm Gauntlets, because those are amazing against the Ork forces. So if you're playing a map that has a lot of cover, then the Flamestorm Gauntlets can be great. If you're going to be in a big open map, these guys will get shot up from range and killed before they can get into combat. So I would say it's more map dependent than 100% never use, but it's damn near close with these guys, because I can only think of like 2 matches that these guys really changed the situation for my opponent, and that's because he kept plopping them into positions that gave him 100% cover, and then he could pop around the corner and kill my guys that were sniping other valuable targets, and then pop back into 100% cover so I could never return fire and get the kills. And then once he got my guys surrounded with his jump infantry, these guys, in addition to everybody else, just locked me down, and then these guys were doing like the coup de grace on all my guys every turn. So it was definitely a nightmare situation, but again, that was just due to poor planning on my part. I never use the intercessors because I find that the orcs can outshoot you at range. I mean, these guys are pretty decent, you know, giving them the auto bolt rifle. They have a good amount of shots. They can do a decent amount of damage against the orcs, but the orcs will outshoot you, and therefore you're unlikely to get point values with these guys, so I tend not to use them. It's kind of nice to have the frag grenades and have the increased damage and things like that, especially if you're buffing the battle line tactics, but for the most part I'll take a jump infantry any day of the week over these guys, because the orcs, again, will outshoot you, and therefore it doesn't make sense for you to bring these guys. In terms of alternatives to this force, I think you could make an argument that you may want to bring a lieutenant, because again, he can be very powerful at taking out HQ units with his chainsword. If you need him to wipe out squads, you could give him the Thunderhammer, because he'll have 3 splash damage. He's got great buffing abilities, including the Graces of the Angel, which give you plus 50% momentum gains, and you also have tactical precision, which will allow you to snipe units better. An alternative force that I will frequently use is you could do Sanguinary Guard, and then with these axes you could just jump these guys into combat and start killing big mechs, war bosses, death dreads, pretty much anything these guys would be able to kill. And the orc knobs tend to give so much momentum that it makes it really easy for these guys to surge and start attacking and just do massive amounts of damage and mess up the enemy lines. But that also requires them to be grouped up. So I have had some good success with the Death Company and kind of just doing the sheer amount of numbers here to lock everybody into melee combat and have them spread out enough that the Burner Boys don't just wipe everybody out. But if you know you're fighting a more elite player that's going to have vehicles and other things, then the Sanguinary Guard are an excellent choice. The Librarian is also a good choice because, again, he has good splash damage, he has good base damage, he's got good AoE attack, so he can attack multiple guys. If you're using him to jump into combat, he'll get additional ranged armor and evasion, so all those things will make it harder for him to get killed. Once he gets into melee, assuming there's not another melee, or once he gets into melee range against ranged units, but if there's guys that have melee, they'll typically outperform him, so you just got to be aware of that when you're fighting them. But the Librarian can definitely pay dividends on you. If you're doing a heavy mech build, then you would want to bring a Tech Marine, because he's got some good damage boosts, especially to the Invictor here. You know, increasing the damage by 25%, 15% accuracy will easily allow him to snipe out a war boss or a weird boy. Now, attacking a war boss, by himself, he will not be able to get the kill, but he can take out a weird boy for sure. Furiosos are very map dependent. If you have some good cover, bringing them in for a heavy flamer can be absolutely devastating against the orc forces, but for the most part, now that beamy def guns have been buffed so much, the chance of you getting able to get into melee combat with a Furioso Dreadnought to be able to flame is extremely unlikely, because the beamy def guns will just do so much damage to these guys. So for that reason, I can't foresee myself bringing these guys against orcs in the near future unless something were to change to the Ludas with the beamy def guns, but in the past this was always backbone of my army. So that was definitely something that changed with the changes, and it actually bumped up the Invictor Warsuit because I needed to stay at longer range to make sure I could get the kills. Terminators can be very good against the orcs. The big thing is you just want to make sure there's not a bunch of knobs or mega armor knobs, death dreads, somebody around here that's going to be able to kill them, or a war boss obviously. But when you give them the Thunderhammer Storm Shield with 9 armor, they can then take good hits. Storm Boys can no longer do good damage to them because their armor piercing was nerfed, so unless they're getting rear attacks, you're really not going to have to worry about them, and these guys should be able to kill pretty much anything. And then with their deep strike ability, going up to 10 tiles, you can definitely put these into the middle of enemy opponents and you can just wreak havoc. So these are definitely a good alternative and map dependent. Like I said, I love the Predators. The land speeders are also a decent choice, but the beamy def guns are going to most likely blow them out of the sky. So unless you're going to guarantee that you can get them into cover where the beamy def guns and the flash kits are not destroying them, these guys can pay dividends, but you need to be very, very cautious because the Orks are a range faction in this game, and they will be able to outrange you. So be very, very cautious. Likewise, the Inceptors can be a good option. Both the assault bolter and the plasma gun here. The big thing is, you can jump them into combat to, if you were going to use them as like grenades, if there's only like one unit in the squad left, then you can do the death from above, and that'll give you splash damage of 30 to 40 with an armor piercing of 2 up to 6 models. And then again, because most of the Orks don't have good armor, that will be pretty decent damage. But if you do have them alive, all 3 models alive, you can either use them at their default kit with the assault bolter, which will do decent damage against the Orks because they don't have a lot of armor. But if you want to do damage against everything, then I think it always makes sense to give them the plasma guns here, and that'll allow you to do anti-armor, anti-heavy, anti-medium, and just with the sheer amount of shots they'll do a bunch of damage. And these weapons here have a zone of control, so any ranged units that are trying to move out of there will then end up getting attacks of opportunity here. So definitely keep that in mind when you're playing as this faction. In terms of the command points, you can make an argument for doing the strafing run because, again, the Orks don't have a lot of armor, but for the most part, using the tier 2 ability with calling in the assault squad is going to be a much wiser decision for the Space Marines. And the reason for that is, again, you're going to get, when you first call them in, if you summon them on a square that has an enemy unit, that's going to be a free charge attack, and then you can move them around and do another charge attack. And then because they're in melee, they then lock that unit down, so you can capture strategic points across the other side of the map. You can do all sorts of things. So for that reason, the tier 2 ability is almost always the better choice. Now, with the Orks, there is a chance that their units may be grouped together, because the big thing with the Orks is you want to stack buffs, and most of the buffs that the Orks have are from their HQ units, I should call them, and most of them have range of 2. So if you did have a big blob of Orks, I should say, surrounded by a hero, if you wanted to drop the bomb on them and kill the hero and then do splash damage to everybody around it, that would make sense. But for the most part, using the tier 2 ability to be able to summon the assault squad is going to be just as effective, because the chance of them having everybody within that 3x3 square is pretty unlikely, especially late in the game when you're getting that tier 3 ability. So I hope this gives you some ideas on how to use the Blood Angels against the Ork forces here. As you can see, the Blood Angels have effective forces against pretty much anything the Orks can throw at you, so you do have a slight advantage. The big thing is just respect the beamy def guns. When the game was first released and through a couple of patches, they weren't very good. They're now very, very good because they have more shots, and then Orks will stack their tier 1 ability to get them additional shots on top of that, so they will absolutely liquidate your forces that are coded as vehicles, so you need to keep them alive and be extremely cautious with that. But if you can, because of that and the other buffs that have happened to the flash kits and the other range units, you'll want to do a big heavy melee build and just close them into combat and get to kill. So if you're struggling with playing as a certain faction against another one and you need some assistance, comment below the video, and whoever gets the most votes for what faction people are struggling with the most, I will try to make one of these videos specifically about that faction, explain my reasons for why I like certain force builds against that faction, what units I never use against those factions, and what units can alternatively be used for different matches depending on the situation. So if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.